Hello, and welcome to the Starting Point Education Channel. My name is Loretta Depka. I'm the executive director here, and I'm lucky enough to have Pat Obst, who is a licensed clinical social worker and specializes in loss and grief. I'm sure you met Pat on previous podcasts that we've done. We've been doing a series called Doing Grief Well, and tonight is the second part of the Doing Grief Well toolkit. Pat has been practicing for over 25 years, or 20 years, I'm sorry. I'm aging you as I speak, Pat.
Thanks.
She's been practicing for 20 years and specializes in grief counseling after losing her son, Ricky. So we're going to just jump right in here to finish up this two-part series on Doing Grief Well toolkit. So tonight we're going to talk about the general tools to manage depression and anxiety that are often part of the grieving process. So Pat, you're going to share some helpful tools, understanding, managing, and moving beyond grief depression, and understand, managing, and calming grief anxiety. So do you want to jump in here with talking about what we need to understand about depression as part of grief?
Well, so depression as part of grief can differ from clinical depression. If you're crying every day, you've probably got some form of clinical depression. If you're crying every day and you just had a major loss, that's actually pretty normal, right? Like, in other words, it's a clinical mental health issue if you're not in grief. But if you're in grief, it goes along with the territory. So that's one thing, is understanding that depression is a natural part of grieving. Also, a lot of the chemical imbalances and changes that go on in the brain after a loss are similar to what happens, in a brain that has depression. Now, depression versus sadness. Depression is more like, there's a lot of rumination with that, where sadness, it's more you're feeling glum. There's not a lot of fueling of all those thoughts and whatnot. So that's another kind of differentiation. The changes in the brain that happen, I think, if whether you listen to the Grief Brain podcast before or not, it's good to revisit it. I talk in depth about what happens to our brain chemically when we go through a loss. So there too, it'll help you just enhance your understanding of the depression and why it's happening and how it's working in your brain if you listen to that. Now, grief depression can turn into that kind of clinical depression that can really affect our functioning when it becomes complicated grief. Complicated grief, we get stuck in like the Jersey Circle with our thoughts, and we hear ourselves keep repeating the same things over and over again, and there doesn't seem to be any way that we're looking towards a future at all, that sort of thing. We keep looking backwards. So even grief depression, which is normal, can turn into clinical depression, and then we call it complicated grief because you get stuck.
And how do you manage that kind of grief, though? Is it temporary? Are there natural ways to do it? Is it medication?
So there's both, right? I think it's important for people to, when we're talking about tools, one of them is to know your mind, know your family history, and know your context, right? So you kind of know how your mind works. Are you somebody who depression has been something that you've always struggled with, right? Or is this a new thing? Know your family history. You know, do you have people in your family with clinical depression? Your context, besides the loss that you're going through, is there this cascade or multiple losses going on? So one of the ways that we can manage is to understand it, right? So know your mind, your family's history, and your context. Also, trust in the natural bent of our mind to heal. I mean, generally, our mind is made to heal. So there has to be a certain level of trust there. That's part of the natural way. Look for inspirational people. And what I mean by that is, like I tell people to go on, some people don't want to go to a support group in person. I suggest that they do an online support group, because online is not usually, I mean, there are some that are Zoom, but the ones where you post. And so you can post or not post, right? And you can read other people's posts. And I always encourage people, get to know the usernames of the other people on the group. And the usernames of the people who are more kind of inspiring or resilient, read their posts. But the people who are the Debbie Downers, the victim mode people, don't read their posts. So that's what I mean by, look for inspirational people. So that's kind of in general, or read inspirational stories of people who've come through loss and grief. So as far as medication, some people feel shame around medication. It's not unusual to, in grief, especially for people to go on medication early on, especially if it's a complicated loss or it's a sudden loss. That's such a shock to the system. And that's, as long as you're working with your doctor, I mean, that's a pretty safe thing to do. I tell people to pay attention to their functioning and their comfort level. If you're functioning and it's uncomfortable dealing with your grief, but not debilitating, then you might want to wait. You might want to just keep doing your grief work, working with your therapist, the support groups, that sort of thing. But if you find that you're not functioning, you're not getting up for work, or you're not able to watch your grandchildren, or that sort of thing, or if it's so uncomfortable, because as we'll talk about later, anxiety can be so uncomfortable in grief. So I was just talking to someone today, and we had this conversation about whether or not to use medication, and some people, just having it in their cabinet is enough.
Wow.
They say, I have Ativan, but I never use it. I've never used it yet. I also encourage people to gauge it on a scale of 1 to 10 with your depression. Like 10, I'm going to jump off a bridge. 1 is, I'm good. If you're up in that 9, 10, 8, 9, 10 range a lot, you probably should go on medication. If you just kind of bump up there on a bad day, or when you've gotten triggered, then maybe not. So we can check with ourselves and kind of gauge that way. Because a lot of times people are, well, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? And that gauge can help to figure that out. So, there's no shame in using medication. It's just like any other tool, right? If you broke your leg, you use crutches for a while until you can bear weight on that leg. Well, if you just went through a significant loss, you better use some crutches for a while, because you really can't, your brain can't bear any weight right now, right? Because it's trying to heal. So it's just a tool is all that is. And then the natural methods, I tell people, if you're not going to medicate, then you need to meditate. And I'll talk about that a little bit more about with anxiety, especially. Letting it ebb and flow. You're going to have good days and bad days. So accepting that let the natural course happen. Also capitalize on the good days, or capitalize on the good hours when you feel like you're kind of at least in a neutral state. Get some things done then, because a couple hours later or the next day, you might not feel like getting out of bed. Or capitalize in not just doing things, but maybe have lunch with a friend, that sort of thing. There's also a natural way. It's called the 5-second rule. Mel Robbins is her name, MEL, and then Robbins with 2 B's. She's on YouTube. She has this concept called the 5-second rule that she used when she was depressed in some complicated losses, where you count backwards for each step, basically. So she would say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, sit up in bed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, put your feet on the floor. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, walk to the bathroom. But okay, it can be that kind of, because as kids, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of what our mind remembers. So that's because a lot of times we get depressed because we're so overwhelmed. Oh my God, I have to get up and I have to, do this, that, and the other thing. No, just sit up in bed first. And once you've done that, put your feet on the floor. And then once you've done that, you see what I'm saying? So the 5-second rule is a good tool to use, and people can look that up on YouTube. Also, our phrases. Sometimes we can have phrases that we've maybe learned from other people or created for ourselves. After I lost Ricky, because I was a therapist, I knew that, this was going to take a while. And so my mantra became, if I can't be happy, I may as well be useful. Because I could cry while I did the laundry, or I could cry in a corner in my room, right? So I painted my whole house. I learned to cook Italian with my mother-in-law. So phrases can be helpful. So those are all kind of the natural things. A lot of times people use both, right? They'll have a medication on board, as well as, because you can't just depend on the medication. That's not it's been proven in therapy, no matter what you're dealing with, that just natural methods or just medication, neither one works as good as both when you're in an acute situation. Both the therapy and because you want to get those tools so eventually you can go off the medication. Those tools come up under, and then you can wean off of the medication.
When is the time that you recommend, or is it different for everyone, that they need to get some help with their grief? Is it immediate? And I guess when I say help, a therapist that will help them through it. Is it immediate? Is it a couple months later? When is the time that you reach out?
Well, when you notice that, like, you can't stand it anymore, for one.
Okay.
But also, if a lot of people around you are, people you trust, right, are saying like, Mom, since Daddy died, you've just been sitting in the house, and it's been 6 months, and that sort of thing. When other people are noticing that there's not movement, at the last podcast we talked about this stagnation. So it's from the outside, other people's observations, and also our functioning. Are we getting done what we would like to get done? That's okay for a while, for the laundry to sit, all those other things. I mean, we're busy healing, but if we're not getting out of bed for days or weeks or even months at a time, well, that's the functioning issue. But some people come to me where they just say, I just can't stand this anymore. This isn't who I am. So sometimes people know it's time because they've lost themselves and they can't stand that. They don't even recognize themselves. It's all different. And some it's sooner. Some, I had a woman come to me 3 years later. She found my card from a lecture I did.
Wow.
She was ready. And I've had people come to me who weren't ready. And they had a couple sessions and left. And then they come back and then they're ready to do the work. And we work together for 6 months and then they're much better.
Well, I imagine it's sort of that, you know, you've mentioned it a couple times, particularly in the past few weeks in doing the Grief Well series, is you have to do the work. There's no magic thing that happens, correct? This is all about work.
Well, you know, the old saying, you know, time heals, right? That's true, but time is only one element. If you want to be more thorough, if you want to actually PTG, have post-traumatic growth, where you actually evolve and come out maybe even stronger through this, if you need to be there for other people, like your other children or, you know, other family members or whatever it is, then you better get moving. Right?
So then how do you bring color back into your life and joy and sort of recreate your life after a loss?
So when it comes to the depression, right, it seems like, you know, depression and hopelessness are attached, right? A lot of times when we feel hopeless, we feel depressed. And hopelessness can be, you know, connected with like that we can't fix it. You can't fix that somebody died. You can't fix that you have an illness that, well, you can't reverse, or, you know, that sort of thing. But with, you know, that recreating of life and joy, there's got to be a hopefulness, right? Well, how can you be hopeful if you're sitting at home in a room, right? All the time, depressed. So I always encourage people, one of the tools is always keep one foot in life. So an example of that was, I was about 18 months out from the loss of Ricky, and I went to a Yanni concert. And for whatever reason, there was just this, it was like a nanosecond of joy that I felt. Then it went away and didn't come back again for a couple months. And then it happened more, and then more and more. So if we keep one foot in life, it puts us in the world where there's opportunity for joy to shine through. So when we're depressed and when we're in depression and grief, all the color has been, it has just gone out of life, right? It's like watching black and white TV all the time. You can't have the color come back into life unless you're in life, right? Unless you're engaging with it in some way. Even if you're just faking it, even if you're just smiling and laughing, but you're not really feeling it, you're there where the opportunity can happen for that moment of joy. And then it starts to happen more and more. So keeping one foot in life always. Also envision the possibilities. And this isn't necessarily tied to loss, but I think it can apply to this particular concept. I remember reading a story of a woman who was depressed, not because of loss necessarily, more because of emptiness. She had gotten married, but they were pretty poor, and they moved into this house, but it had nothing in it, like except a mattress, right? That's all. They couldn't afford anything. So she would cry all the time that, you know, it didn't feel like a home and all that. Then she started every day sitting in the middle of the floor of the living room. And after she had a good cry, she would look in the corner and imagine and envision what she wanted to put in that corner. What decoration or table or picture or whatever. And she would do this over and over again. And then she got the idea, well, maybe I'll go to garage sales. So she had a vision. Then she would go to the garage sale and look for what she envisioned for that corner. And she'd find it cheap, right? Garage sales.
Absolutely.
She started decorating her whole home. And now it felt like a home. It didn't feel empty. And that's part of depression, is emptiness, right? So it is important for us to allow ourselves to envision what it is that we want to manifest in our lives. Even if it's like, I had this one parent who lost her child, but she babysits for a neighbor's son. And for one thing, she's keeping one foot in life. So she's engaging with this little kid, and it's joyful, but she wasn't feeling it at first. Then we started having her kind of envision, what are the kinds of things you want to do with him and play with him, and what do you want to teach him, and all that. Then she started getting these ideas of all these things she was going to do with this little boy. Now she's feeling joy. Okay. So that's how it starts to happen. You've got to kind of see it first sometimes in your mind's eye.
I love that. I mean, to envision, I mean, we can use that even outside of loss, right?
Right. But envisioning the healing, envisioning other experiences in life.
What is it that we need to understand about how our body and mind are connected when it comes to grief, depression, or anxiety?
Well, so if we're going to switch over some to focus a little bit more on anxiety, I think a lot of times what produces anxiety is judgment about how we're experiencing. Why am I always so scared? I'm tougher than this. Those sorts of things. That we have to understand that we will often avoid self-judgment, and our mind and our body are connected. So what we're thinking, we're going to do. So if we're thinking in a judgmental way, then the action we're going to take is avoid, right? If we're thinking that we're scared, we're going to avoid, because we're going to push away from anything we're scared about, right? Again, people can look at the Grief Brain podcast, listen to that for an understanding of how anxiety is a part of grief, because a lot of people think they get that depression is, but they don't get that anxiety is. So Dr. Lisa Shulman, and this is one of the points I make in that podcast, she's a professor of neurology at the University of Maryland. She says, quote, following emotional trauma, triggers in our environment, such as daily reminders of loss, may repeatedly activate the body's fight or flight response. That's anxiety, right? This leads to a vicious cycle of distressing dreams, insomnia, rumination, hypervigilance, which is a state of heightened awareness by day, by day, as well as then the insomnia and whatnot at night. In this situation, the amygdala, which is part of the brain, is on overdrive, and we feel anxious and under threat. So that's part people need to understand, that this is why we can't just calm ourselves down because it's stupid to be anxious. There's actual brain stuff going on. So that's that understanding how our body and our mind are connected and how they're working is important, because then we won't judge ourselves as much, and then avoid sitting with our grief or avoid going out to the world. Okay. So that's kind of how that's all connected.
I'm fascinated by judgment and anxiety. It's just not a word I would have ever thought of with anxiety, but we're doing it.
Well, think about if somebody's judging you. Do you all of a sudden feel some level of, like, do you feel, a knot in your stomach? we're feeling afraid because a judgment is an attack, right?
Yep.
So if we're being attacked, we're afraid. So if we're judging ourselves, we're attacking ourselves. And so therefore we're afraid. Well, there's your anxiety.
So what are the tools to manage it then?
So in order to manage that, we sometimes write medication because like I had a client the other day who, as the Novocaine is wearing off with the loss of her son, she said, this is coming out of the blue. All of a sudden there's all this anxiety. That's partly the brain stuff I was just talking about.
Okay.
Also, for her, she's afraid she's never, like, it's always going to be this way. Like, am I going to feel this way forever? That's a scary thought. Like her thoughts are starting to fuel that anxiety. I can't believe I'm never going to see him again. This is going to be my life forever.
Okay.
Okay. When you start having those thoughts, anxiety gets fueled by our thoughts. And so when you start having those kinds of thoughts, and of course, especially, so if you've had a catastrophic illness, if that's your loss, then part of your anxiety is going to be, oh my God, what I have somebody with breast cancer who's got it the second time. Now, like, she's full of this anxiety about, oh my God, am I going to get it a third time? Right? So that's how it can manifest itself in loss due to illness. This woman who lost her son, she wants to bubble wrap her daughter, right? Because she's afraid. So all this anxiety is starting to bubble up. So we talked about medication for the time, and what level of medication she felt okay about. We talked about how to gauge when you need it, because there's a lot of medication that's PRN. It's called as needed. It means Ativan, Xanax. You don't use them on a daily basis. Well, you shouldn't. And how to gauge when she needs it and to use it when she needs it, when that anxiety really ramps up. Are you 7, 8, 9 with your anxiety? Well, then take the Ativan. And if you're down by a 5 or 6, try to use the breathing exercises. Try to use the more natural methods. So, that's one of the tools, medication. And like I said, you want to start to build those natural methods up underneath so that eventually, hopefully, you can go off the medication. I went on Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, actually, after my divorce, because I had to function. I was a youth pastor. I had to take, I was in charge of 100 teenagers, and I had to take 30 of them on a work camp for 9 days.
Oh.
So I needed to manage myself.
That was a great distraction.
Yeah, but I needed to be able to function, right? So a lot of times medications, some medications, because of a chemical imbalance, have to be, long-term, but a lot of them, especially with a loss, it's just to kind of get over that hump. It's just until some time has passed, until some healing has happened, it's almost like it creates, it moves the fear off to the side, kind of takes the edge off so that you can function and so that you can engage in therapy and really learn the tools and that sort of thing. If you're anxious the whole time, you're not going to be able to meditate, right? But medication could possibly take some of that anxiety away so that you can maybe like listen to a guided meditation for 5 minutes, So meditation is not just what most people think it is, which, I got to clear my mind. You never clear your mind in meditation. It's a myth. Your brain is like your heart. You can't tell your heart to stop beating. You can't tell your digestive system to stop working. Well, you can't tell your mind to stop working. So there's meditation is a very different thing than most people think.
And it's a learned skill, isn't it, Pat?
And you have to learn it step by step. And a lot of times I start people with just some simple breathing techniques. We start there, and then we build from there to breathing, along with like visualizations that they can use. Where like one I use is a feather. Forrest Gump, the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Feather comes. The feather in the beginning comes lilting down past the clouds, past the trees, lands at his feet. Well, you attach your breath to the feather. You inhale and exhale and inhale, but you visualize that, but you don't bring the feather to a rest until you feel like you've calmed down. So you have to teach people these techniques until they become, they feel more natural, they feel more comfortable with it. So sometimes the medication and the I'll just use the word meditation, but it's guided imagery, it's breathing techniques, it's using the apps, the apps that talk you through the breathing, all those kinds of things. It can be helpful to be able to start to manage you so that you can function better and get in better control of your fears and stop fueling them. And there's one other trick is what I call the stop strategy. And this is just a 5-step. As soon as you're aware that you're fueling your anxiety, so awareness is number 1. As soon as you're aware, go to step 2. Step 2 is stop the thinking. So tell your brain, stop. Step 3.
Stop thinking. It's really tough.
Okay,
but skill too.
Yeah, but you can do it as long as you move right to step 3.
Okay.
So it's awareness, and then you stop your thinking, and then the third one is change your position or your environment. Because if you stay in the same position, you're going to keep thinking. But when you get up, it sort of interrupts your thought pattern, right?
I like that.
If you're stuck in the car, right? If you change your position, let's say you're anxious and you have both hands on the wheel, you're white knuckling it. Sit back and relax. Change the channel on the station instead of, listening to the news, which is anxiety producing. Turn on something else, right? And so that sort of thing. You have to change either your environment, like in the car, or your position. You literally get up. And 4 is engage your mind in something logical, mathematical, or organizational. Because if you leave your mind idle, what's going to happen? It's going to go right back to the anxiety. Okay. So you need to push in the direction away from that. So as soon as you become, and those first 4 steps are very quick. As soon as you become aware, tell your brain to stop thinking about that, particular thing. Change your environment or your position. Engage in something that's going to, like something mathematical, like people who on planes, right? They hate the takeoff and the landing. So I have them doing the multiplication tables backwards. But doing the multiplication, no, wait a minute. Doing the multiplication tables or counting by 7s backwards.
Okay, that's bad.
Those kind, or doing Sudoku, that sort of thing, mathematical. Organizational, if you're at home, you can organize something, right? Physically, organize a drawer, that sort of. If you're in your car, you start organizing, your grocery list or, that sort of thing. Logical is more like problem solving, not a stressful problem, but a problem that's like, okay, well, who do I need to call in order to whatever? And you're sort of figuring it out, right? Because what happens is the other part of your brain starts to engage instead of that emotional fear part. And so that starts to calm down. So you can get to number 4 very quickly within a couple minutes. And then you can be in that engaging your mind for anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour if you want. Number 5 is if you still feel like you need to do a breathing exercise to kind of bring down that anxiety another notch, then that's number 5. So that's called the stop strategy. So those are some tools to manage and get that fear under control.
I really like those steps. I think they're great.
I'll see if I can get them to you so you can post them.
Okay, that's a great
Mhm.
idea.
Mhm.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anything we missed, Pat?
Well, so it's one thing to kind of stop that fear, but then how do we begin to create the calmness so that that we can start to get back in life, not just stop the fear, but create a calm. So that's where mindfulness comes in. There are books on mindfulness. You can find it anywhere, like how to practice mindfulness. Because when we're present, we're not worrying about the future and we're not ruminating about the past, right? And both of those things can create anxiety, right? If we stay in the present. Also, I always encourage people to, I call GRG, ground, reset, gratitude. While you're in this grieving process and your mind is trying to heal, your heart is trying to heal, grounding yourself, especially if you have a lot of anxiety with it. When we ground ourselves, right? If we are sitting on a four-legged stable chair, we don't feel anxious. But if we were to start to rock back on that chair on two legs, we get a little anxious, right? That's going to tip.
Absolutely.
Okay. So grounding ourselves is really important. And there's all kinds of different ways to do that. Usually I encourage people to do it in the morning. For some people it's prayer, it's reading in some sort of a daily affirmation thing, it's meditation, it's exercise, it's whatever it is that's going to make you feel kind of grounded, like not every single thing in my life is in chaos. Okay. The resetting is like those tools, like the stop strategy. Let me reset myself because I feel myself ramping up. Right. And we can reset ourselves with a simple breathing exercise. I tell people when you're at work, go to the ladies' room, take a minute, do a breathing exercise, reset yourself, come back. Then at the end of the day, you're not like ready to have a panic attack. Because if you keep resetting, you won't get to that level 10. Right? If you reset when you're getting up to 5 and you go back down to 4, and then you get up to 6 and you go back down to 5. At the end of the day, you're at a 5, as opposed to it going 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So resetting is important, and use those tools to do that. And then gratitude. Now look, when we're in loss, we really don't feel grateful, generally. It's still important for us to speak gratitude, because again, it's sort of that envisioning, right? If we are feeling like when we're grateful, there's some level of hope, because we're grateful for the simplest of things, which gives us hope that sometimes the simplest things, it's like, that's there for us. Okay, if that's there for us, then we can take the next step. Then we can still survive. Then we can still live another day. So gratitude is really important for us also, because gratitude is about living, right? Loss a lot of times is something has died. A person who we used to be, right? A part of our body, a relationship. Through divorce, something has died. And when we're grateful, we're paying attention to what we have in our lives. So gratitude is about tapping into life. So ground yourself in the morning, reset throughout the day, gratitude at night. Make sense?
That's a great life lesson, even outside of grief.
And so, what I'd like to end with is actually a quote that that I found that's from Daily Dose of Inspiration. And this is really about, one other tool here in coming to that calmness. Again, this kind of has to do with hope, is trusting in your resilience, that you will rise again, right? The quote goes, you don't need to know with absolute certainty what the future will hold. You just have to trust that no matter what happens, you'll find a way to be okay.
Oh, I like that.
And that finding a way, that's what we're talking about with the toolkit. That's how you find your way. That's the work of doing the work along the grief journey, is that you find that way because you're moving. You're using the tools that help you keep moving. And that is the toolkit.
I love it, Pat. I think this was really helpful. And I hope that everyone's listening can try these tools and that they will bring you some peace. And I can't thank you enough, Pat, for taking the time to do this. So part one of this Doing Grief Well Toolkit series is already on our education channel. We look forward to you, if you missed it, to go back and listen. And also there are 9 other programs that talk about doing grief well. So I encourage all of you to just scroll and see what you can find that can help you or that you're interested in. Thanks, Pat. Have a good night.
You too. Take care, everyone.